The underground dining room fell dead silent. The ruthless head of the Moretti syndicate had just used a foreign tongue to degrade a simple waitress in front of his billionaire guests. He expected her to cower. Instead, she looked him dead in the eye and answered back in perfect, venomous Hindi. The Obsidian Room, hidden beneath the opulent floors of Chicago's Wellington Hotel, was not a place where ordinary people dined. There were no neon signs outside, no social media check-ins, and certainly no walk-ins. It was a subterranean fortress of velvet, mahogany, and whispered secrets. A sanctuary where the city's elite and its most dangerous predators could conduct their business away from the prying eyes of the law. A single meal here cost more than a standard luxury car, but the patrons weren't paying for the truffle-infused Wagyu or the vintage Bordeaux. They were paying for absolute, unquestionable discretion. Elena Harrington adjusted the stiff collar of her heavily starched uniform, her fingers trembling slightly as she smoothed down the black fabric. For the past 3 years, Elena had been a ghost. She was no longer the cosmopolitan daughter of Richard Harrington, a high-ranking diplomat who had spent decades brokering delicate international treaties before a massive political scandal stripped him of his title, his fortune, and ultimately, his life. The scandal had left Elena drowning in a sea of his hidden debts owed to the kind of people who didn't send collection letters, but rather men with broken knuckles and hollow eyes. To survive, she had buried her past, changed her last name to Jenkins on her employment forms, and taken a job serving the very underworld figures she was desperately hiding from. "Table 4 is yours tonight, Elena," whispered Mr. Harrison, the maitre d', his usually composed face slick with a thin sheen of nervous sweat. He was a man who had seen politicians weep and cartel bosses laugh, but tonight his hands were shaking as he organized the seating chart. "And I need you to be flawless. No dropped forks, no lingering eye contact, no speaking unless spoken to. Do you understand me?" Elena looked at him, her heart giving a dull, heavy thud. "Who is booking table 4? "Gabriel Moretti," Harrison said, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper, as if merely speaking the name could summon the man from the shadows. "And he's bringing guests. Foreign investors, Owen Patrick and Silas Croft." A cold chill washed over Elena's spine. Everyone in the subterranean world of Chicago knew of Gabriel Moretti. At 32, he was the undisputed head of the Moretti crime syndicate. He had inherited the empire young, but he hadn't just maintained it, he had modernized it, turning a brutal street-level mafia into a sophisticated corporate conglomerate of illicit trade. He was known to be a man of cold calculation, terrifying intellect, and absolute ruthlessness. He didn't yell, he didn't have to. A single look from Gabriel was usually enough to end a man's career or his life. Patrick and Croft, on the other hand, were ghosts of a different nature. Elena recognized the names from her father's old intelligence files. They were British expats who effectively controlled the black market shipping lanes out of Mumbai, India. They were weapon smugglers hiding behind the facade of a legitimate maritime logistics company. If Gabriel Moretti was meeting with them in the Obsidian Room, it meant the syndicate was expanding its reach into South Asia. The stakes of this dinner were in the hundreds of millions. "I'll handle it, mister." "Harrison," Elena said, keeping her voice, even though her stomach twisted into tight knots. She grabbed a pristine white towel, draping it over her forearm. "Just be a shadow, Elena. A shadow that pours wine," Harrison instructed strictly, adjusting his tie as the heavy brass doors of the private dining sector began to swing open. The air in the room seemed to physically shift as Gabriel Moretti walked in. He moved with a predatory grace, his broad shoulders filling out a bespoke charcoal suit that likely cost more than Elena's annual rent. He was devastatingly handsome, with sharp, aristocratic features, piercing dark eyes, and a jawline carved from granite. But it was the coldness radiating from him that commanded the room. Flanking him were 2 massive bodyguards, Thomas and Leo, men who looked like they broke bones for morning exercise. Behind Gabriel walked Owen Patrick and Silas Croft. Patrick was older, leaning heavily on a silver-tipped cane, his face flushed with the arrogance of old money. Croft was younger, wiry, with restless, calculating eyes. "Gentlemen, please," Gabriel said, his voice a low, smooth baritone that echoed effortlessly across the private dining space. He gestured to the circular mahogany table sitting under a low-hanging chandelier. "Welcome to Chicago." Elena stood by the service station, her back straight, her expression an unreadable mask. She watched as the men took their seats. Gabriel sat at the head, radiating an effortless authority. As Elena approached to pour the initial round of sparkling water, she kept her eyes downcast, focusing entirely on the rim of the crystal glasses. "We appreciate the hospitality, Gabrielle," Owen Patrick said, settling into his chair with a heavy sigh. "Though I must admit, flying halfway across the world for a dinner conversation seems a bit archaic. We could have settled this over secure channels." "I don't do business over screens, Owen," Gabrielle replied smoothly, not even glancing at Elena as she leaned in to pour his water. "I need to look a man in the eyes when I entrust him with my cargo, especially when that cargo is moving through the ports of Mumbai." Elena finished pouring, stepping back gracefully into the shadows. She knew the drill. She was furniture. She was less than human to these men. She was simply a mechanism to deliver their food and drink. She stood in silence as the first course, a delicate tuna tartare, was brought out by the kitchen staff. Elena took over the wine service, uncorking a vintage Chateau Margaux with practiced, silent precision. As the dinner progressed, the tension at the table grew palpable. Patrick and Croft were playing hardball, trying to squeeze Gabrielle for a higher percentage of the shipping profits. They thought they had the upper hand because they controlled the territory. They thought Gabrielle, a man who ruled the concrete jungle of Chicago, was out of his depth dealing with the complex, chaotic underworld of the Indian subcontinent. "You have to understand the culture, Gabrielle." Silas Croft sneered slightly, swirling his wine glass. "Mumbai is not Chicago. You can't just bully your way through the docks. It requires nuance. It requires a certain linguistic and cultural fluency that, quite frankly, your organization lacks. If we are taking on the risk of moving your product through our territory, we demand 40%. Gabriel's eyes narrowed imperceptibly. He slowly placed his silver fork down onto his porcelain plate. The tiny clink sounded like a gunshot in the quiet room. Elena, standing mere feet away with a silver tray pressed to her hip, stopped breathing. She recognized the sudden shift in the air. It was the calm before the violence. Gabriel leaned back in his leather chair, steepling his long fingers together. He didn't look angry. In fact, a dangerous mocking smoke played at the corners of his mouth. He looked at Silas Croft, then at Owen Patrick, letting the silence stretch until it became suffocating. "Linguistic and cultural fluency," Gabriel repeated, the words rolling off his tongue like velvet. "You think because you operate out of Colaba and sip chai with corrupt port authority officers, you hold the keys to the kingdom?" "We know the landscape," Patrick said defensively, though he shifted uncomfortably under Gabriel's unwavering stare. "We speak the language. We know how the local hierarchy functions. You are an outsider there, Moretti." Gabriel chuckled, a dark, humorless sound. He decided, right then and there, to completely dismantle their arrogance. He needed to show them that he wasn't just a local mobster. He was a global force, a man who prepared for every variable, who knew their territory better than they did. And to prove his point, he decided to use the nearest disposable object in the room. He locked eyes with Elena. Elena froze. The golden rule of the Obsidian Room was that patrons never interacted with the staff beyond a nod. But Gabriel was staring directly at her, his dark eyes stripping away her invisibility. He snapped his fingers, a sharp, authoritative sound. "Waitress," Gabriel commanded. "Come here." Elena swallowed the lump of sheer panic rising in her throat. She stepped forward, her posture perfect, keeping her face completely devoid of emotion. "Yes, sir. How may I assist you?" Gabriel didn't look away from her, but he spoke loudly enough for Patrick and Croft to hear. He was going to demonstrate his linguistic fluency right now, using this local, presumably uneducated Chicago girl as a prop for his dominance. Without breaking eye contact with Elena, Gabriel suddenly switched languages. The transition was seamless. "Dekho is ladki ko." "Look at this girl," Gabriel said in Hindi, his voice dripping with condescension. His accent was incredibly sharp, clearly learned from high-level native speakers rather than street merchants. "Ye yahan sirf hamari farmaish puri karne ke liye hai. Ise lagta hai ki ye samajhti hai dunya kaise. Shalti hai, par iske dimaag mein sirf khali jagah hai." She is here only to fulfill our orders. She thinks she understands how the world works, but there is only empty space in her head. Owen Patrick and Silas Croft exchanged surprised glances. They hadn't expected the Italian-American Mafia boss to speak fluent Hindi. Gabriel's point was instantly made. He was not a naive outsider. Gabriel smiled cruelly, continuing his demonstration. He gestured toward Elena's plain black apron. "Ye ek mamuli naukrani hai. Iski aukat sirf hamare yuta saaf karne ka hai. U fir bhi ye yahan kar hai. Ye se iska koi vayudo." Kitni buri tara se ye anjan hai apni, choti si zindagi se. She is a lowly servant. Her worth is only to clean our shoes, and yet she stands here as if she has an existence. How terribly ignorant she is of her own pathetic life. Patrick let out a low, booming laugh, clearly impressed and amused by the brutal theatricality of it. Croft smirked, nodding in acknowledgement of Gabriel's linguistic flex. Very impressive. Gabriel, Croft conceded in English, chuckling. I see you've been practicing your parlor tricks. It's not a trick, Silas. It's preparation, Gabriel replied in English, his eyes still locked on Elena, assessing her reaction. He expected her to look confused, embarrassed, perhaps nervously smiling without understanding a single syllable of the insults he had just hurled at her. He expected her to be a blank canvas for his power play. Elena stood perfectly still. Her heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. A lesser woman would have bowed her head and walked away. A smarter woman would have pretended she hadn't understood a word, preserving her cover and her safety. But in that agonizing, breathless moment, the ghost of Elena Harrington vanished, and the daughter of Ambassador Richard Harrington, a woman who had spent 4 years living in a diplomatic estate in New Delhi, attending high society galas and debating political theory in pure, unadulterated Hindi, snapped back to life. She remembered her father's voice, never let a man who bought his power speak down to a woman who earned her grace. Elena slowly reached out and picked up the bottle of Chateau Margaux. She stepped closer to Gabriel, invading his personal space just a fraction of an inch more than was strictly professional. She leaned over to top off his glass. Then she opened her mouth. Apki basha per, pakad, achi hai, janab. Your grasp on the language is good, sir, Elena said. Her voice was no longer the meek whisper of a waitress. It was clear, melodic, and ringing with absolute terrifying authority. Gabriel's smug smile instantly vanished. He froze, his entire body going rigid. The laughter died in Patrick's throat. Croft's jaw physically dropped. Elena wasn't finished. She poured the wine with a steady hand, her eyes flashing with a dangerous, suppressed fire as she looked down at the feared Mafia boss. She switched into a higher, more formal register of Hindi, the kind spoken in royal courts and high-level diplomatic circles, a dialect that made Gabriel's street-learned pronunciation sound crude by comparison. Lekin aapka lehia batata hai, ki aapne shabdon ko ratha hai, unki izzat karna nahi sikha. But your accent shows that you have memorized the words, you have not learned to respect them. Elena continued smoothly, placing the bottle down on the table. Ab sokhta hain ki kisi ko ni chadikane sa aapki takot bati hai. Par sakto ye hai ki ek asli na taka bhi apni aukaat un logo ko gira kar sabit nahi karta jo uske liye kaam karta hain. You think that by belittling someone your power increases. But the truth is, a real leader never proves his worth by degrading the people who work for him. The silence in the obsidian room was absolute. It was so profound that Elena could hear the soft humming of the air conditioning vents and the frantic beating of her own heart. She picked up her silver serving tray, taking a deliberate step back to her designated corner. Before she turned away, she offered Gabriel a polite, devastatingly empty smile and delivered her final blow in English. If there is anything else you require to stroke your ego tonight, Mr. Moretti, please do not hesitate to ask. The kitchen is fully prepared to accommodate your insecurities. Thomas and Leo, Gabriel's bodyguards, instantly reached for the inner lining of their jackets, their faces twisting in fury at the blatant disrespect shown to their boss. The air turned completely lethal. A waitress had just publicly humiliated the head of the Chicago syndicate. Men had been buried in concrete for far less. Stop, Gabriel commanded softly. He raised a single hand, his fingers spreading slightly. His men instantly froze, dropping their hands. Gabriel slowly turned his head to fully look at Elena. The coldness in his dark eyes was gone. In its place was something entirely different. It was a burning, intense shock, rapidly melting into a dangerous, consuming fascination. He looked at her as if she had just materialized out of thin air, a puzzle piece that didn't fit into the meticulously organized picture of his world. He had expected to humiliate a pawn. Instead, he had just been checkmated by the queen, while Owen Patrick whispered into the deafening silence, nervously dabbing his forehead with a linen napkin. That was unexpected. Gabriel didn't reply to Owen. He didn't even look at his billionaire guests. His eyes remained locked on the waitress in the plain black uniform, a woman whose name tag read Jenkins, but whose posture screamed royalty. "What did you say your name was?" Gabriel asked, his voice low, a dangerous purr that made the hairs on Elena's arms stand up. "Elena, sir," she replied smoothly, though she was mentally mapping the quickest exit to the service elevator. Gabriel tilted his head, a genuine, slow smile finally creeping across his face. It wasn't a kind smile. It was the smile of a predator who had just found the most interesting prey of his life. "Elena," he repeated, tasting the syllables of her name. "You and I are going to have a very long conversation after this dinner." The remainder of the dinner felt like walking barefoot over shattered glass. Elena moved through the obsidian room with mechanical precision, clearing plates and pouring espresso, never once allowing her eyes to dart back toward table 4. Yet, she could feel Gabriel Moretti's gaze burning into her spine, a heavy, calculated weight that tracked her every movement. When the billionaire guests, Owen Patrick and Silas Croft, finally departed with tense handshakes, Elena practically sprinted toward the kitchen's swinging doors. Her shift was over. She needed to vanish. She stripped off her black apron, her fingers fumbling with the harsh knot at her waist. Her mind raced through a frantic calculus of survival. She had enough cash stashed in her studio apartment to buy a bus ticket to Portland. She could change her name again. She could dye her hair. "Elena," a voice hissed. She jumped, spinning around to see Mr. Harrison, the maitre d', looking as pale as a sheet of parchment. He was wringing his hands, a gesture completely at odds with his usually immaculate composure. "Mr. Harrison, I was just clocking out." "You're not going anywhere," he interrupted, his voice trembling. "Mr. Moretti hasn't left the building. He has taken the private elevator up to the Wellington's penthouse suite. He requested you." Elena's blood ran cold. "I'm a waitress, Mr. Harrison. My shift is over. I don't do room service." "You do tonight," Harrison pleaded, leaning in closer. "Please, Elena. Thomas and Leo are waiting by the service elevator. If you walk out the back door, they will simply drag you into an alley. If you go upstairs, at least you're in the hotel. Don't make a scene. Just go." Elena swallowed hard. The illusion of safety she had built over the last 3 years had completely shattered because of her own pride. Taking a deep breath to steady her hammering heart, she bypassed the locker room and walked toward the heavy steel doors of the service elevator. True to Harrison's word, Gabriel's 2 massive bodyguards were waiting. They didn't say a word. They simply stepped inside the wood-paneled car and pressed the button for the penthouse. The Wellington's penthouse was a sprawling monument to excessive wealth, wrapped in floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a dizzying, panoramic view of the Chicago skyline. The city lights glittered like scattered diamonds against the pitch-black lake. When Elena stepped into the main living area, the sheer silence of the soundproofed room pressed against her ears. Gabriel Moretti was standing by the glass, holding a crystal tumbler of amber liquid. He had discarded his suit jacket, and his white dress shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, revealing the faint edge of a dark tattoo on his collarbone. "Leave us," Gabriel commanded without turning around. The heavy oak doors clicked shut as Thomas and Leo exited, leaving Elena entirely alone with the most dangerous man in the city. "You have a fascinating profile, Elena Jenkins," Gabriel murmured, turning to face her. He walked over to a massive black marble dining table and picked up a slim manila folder, or should I say, a complete lack of one. No credit history before 2023. A social security number that flags as a reissue. A meticulously boring existence. Elena stood near the entrance, her posture rigid. "I value my privacy, Mr. Moretti. Was there a complaint about the service tonight?" Gabrielle chuckled, a low, rumbling sound that vibrated through the quiet room. "You publicly dressed me down in high court Hindi in front of 2 of the most powerful maritime smugglers in Europe, and you're asking about the service?" He tossed the folder onto the table. "I don't like mysteries, Elena. When I encounter something I don't understand, I dismantle it until I do." He took a slow sip of his whiskey, his dark eyes locking onto hers. "When you left the dining room, I made a phone call to a contact of mine at Kroll Incorporated. Are you familiar with them, the corporate intelligence firm?" Elena's breath hitched. Kroll was the gold standard for global risk and background investigations. If Gabrielle had them on retainer, her flimsy alias didn't stand a chance. It took their analysts exactly 45 minutes to run a deep web facial recognition scan using the hotel's security footage. Gabriel continued, his voice dropping to a deadly, quiet register. He took a step toward her. They cross-referenced it with international diplomatic registries. Imagine my surprise when the system bypassed local databases and hit a match in the archived files of the United States State Department. He stopped mere inches from her. Elena could smell the expensive, smoky scent of his cologne mixed with the sharp bite of bourbon. "Hello, Elena Harrington," Gabriel whispered, daughter of the late Ambassador Richard Harrington. Elena closed her eyes, a profound sense of exhaustion washing over her. The game was up. "What do you want, Mr. Moretti?" "I want to know what the highly educated, multilingual daughter of a disgraced American diplomat is doing, slinging tuna tartare in a mob-run basement in Chicago," Gabriel stated, his gaze burning into her. "Your father was accused of embezzling $50 million from a South Asian relief fund before he mysteriously drove his car off a cliff in Big Sur. A fortune that was never recovered. So, either you are sitting on a mountain of stolen cash and playing a brilliant long game, or you are hiding from the people who actually took it." Elena's eyes snapped open, a flare of defensive anger overpowering her fear. "My father was not a thief. He was framed." "Everyone in my world says they were framed, Elena," Gabriel replied smoothly. "He discovered a discrepancy in the international aid shipments." Elena fired back, her voice rising with an undeniable, fierce conviction. "He found out that the diplomatic channels were being used to launder money and move weapons through the Mumbai ports. He was building a dossier to take it to Interpol, but they found out, they killed him, pinned the missing funds on him to destroy his credibility, and then they came for me." Gabriel's eyes narrowed slightly, the pieces clicking together in his razor-sharp mind. "Who came for you?" "The people who really control the ports," Elena said, her voice shaking slightly as she recalled the night she had to flee her family home, the Kessler Syndicate. A heavy, dangerous silence descended upon the penthouse. Gabriel's demeanor instantly shifted from predatory amusement to absolute, chilling focus. Dominic Kessler was a phantom in the European underworld, a ruthless billionaire arms dealer who operated out of the shadows of Mayfair, London. If Kessler was controlling the Mumbai ports, Gabriel looked toward the door, then back at Elena. "Owen, Patrick, and Silas Croft," he murmured, his jaw clenching. "They aren't independent operators. They are Kessler's frontmen." "Yes," Elena breathed. "And if you finalize a deal with them, you aren't expanding your empire, Mr. Moretti. You are walking directly into Dominic Kessler's slaughterhouse. He will use your shipping routes to move his product, and when the feds close in, he'll leave your syndicate holding the bag." Gabrielle stared at her, realizing the magnitude of what had just happened. This waitress hadn't just humiliated him. She had inadvertently saved his entire organization from a fatal trap. Gabriel paced the length of the penthouse, his mind working at lightning speed. For the first time in his life, he was dealing with an entirely unpredictable variable. Elena Harrington wasn't a pawn, and she wasn't a queen. She was the entire chessboard. "Where is your father's dossier?" Gabriel demanded, stopping to look at her. The proof he was gathering for Interpol. "Why would I tell you?" Elena asked, lifting her chin defiantly. "So you can use it to blackmail Kessler into a better cut?" "So I can keep you alive," Gabriel snapped, closing the distance between them again. "Do you think you're safe here? You just paraded your face and your fluent Hindi in front of 2 of Kessler's top lieutenants. How long do you think it will take Patrick to realize the waitress who insulted them looked exactly like the dead diplomat's missing daughter? They will have your identity verified by morning, and Kessler's cleanup crew will be kicking down the door of whatever miserable apartment you live in by noon." The color drained from Elena's face. In her rush to defend her pride, she had exposed her most dangerous secret to the exact men she had spent 3 years running from. She swayed slightly, the adrenaline suddenly crashing. Gabriel caught her elbow, his grip remarkably gentle for a man with a reputation for extreme violence. "Sit down," he ordered, guiding her toward a plush leather sofa. Before Elena could sink into the cushions, a sharp electronic beep echoed through the room. Gabriel's secure satellite phone, resting on the marble table, was flashing bright red. Gabriel answered it, putting it on speaker. Status. "Boss, we have a massive problem." Thomas's voice crackled through the speaker, overlaid with the chaotic sounds of shouting and shattering glass. Patrick and Croft didn't leave the city. They looped back. A heavily armed tactical team just breached the loading dock and the underground garage. They bypassed the lobby entirely. They are moving up the service elevators. Gabriel's eyes locked onto Elena's. "Are they gunning for me or the girl?" "Both," I think Thomas yelled over the sound of a distant gunshot. They hit the locker rooms first. They were looking for the waitress. When they didn't find her, they started blowing the security gates to the private lifts. They are coming to the penthouse, Gabrielle. You have less than 2 minutes. Gabriel hung up the phone. He didn't panic. He didn't curse. The calm that washed over him was terrifying. It was the absolute lethal serenity of a man who was born for war. He moved to a seemingly blank wall panel near the fireplace, pressed his thumb against a hidden biometric scanner, and the wood slid back to reveal a meticulously stocked armory. He pulled out a matte black Glock 19, racking the slide with a sharp clack, and shoved 2 extra magazines into his pockets. Get up, Gabrielle ordered, grabbing Elena's hand and pulling her to her feet. We are leaving. How? Elena panicked, her eyes wide as she looked at the heavily reinforced penthouse doors. They are coming up the elevators! I don't rely on public exits, Gabriel said coldly. He dragged her toward the master bedroom, pushing past the king-size bed and straight into the massive walk-in closet. He kicked back a heavy Persian rug, revealing a steel trapdoor set flush into the hardwood floor. A private maintenance shaft, Gabrielle explained, punching a 4-digit code into the lock. The hatch hissed open, revealing a dark, narrow spiral staircase that plunged into the depths of the building's infrastructure. It leads directly to a secondary garage in the adjacent subway tunnel. Move. Elena didn't hesitate. She scrambled down the metal grate stairs, her sensible black work shoes clanging against the steel. Gabriel followed close behind, pulling the heavy hatch shut and locking it from the inside just as the distant, muffled sound of a C4 explosive blew the penthouse doors off their hinges above them. The descent was agonizingly dark and suffocatingly tight. Elena's breath echoed in the narrow shaft. She was a diplomat's daughter who had been trained in etiquette and international relations, not tactical evasion. Yet, the man right behind her, a brutal mafia boss whom she had despised just hours ago, was currently her only shield against a highly trained assassination squad. Keep moving, Gabriel urged quietly, his hand lightly resting on her shoulder to guide her in the dark. They will hunt us both now, Elena whispered, her voice trembling as they reached the bottom of the shaft. Gabriel pushed open a heavy iron door, leading them into the damp, echoing cavern of an abandoned maintenance tunnel. Let them, Gabriel said, his voice echoing off the concrete walls with a dark, terrifying promise. He stepped in front of her, his gun drawn as he scanned the shadows. He looked back at her, his eyes catching the dim, flickering light of a distant street lamp bleeding through a grating above. You aren't a ghost anymore, Elena Harrington, Gabriel stated, stepping closer until she was backed against the cold, damp wall. Your father's enemies are now my enemies, and nobody touches what is mine. Elena looked up at the ruthless syndicate leader. She had spent 3 years running from the devil, only to end up completely entangled with a demon of a different breed. The underground war had just begun, and the waitress from Table 4 was now the most valuable piece on the board. The damp air of the subway tunnels whipped past them as Gabriel led Elena through a maze of service corridors, his hand securely wrapped around hers. They emerged into a subterranean parking garage, bathed in flickering fluorescent light. In the center sat a heavily armored, matte black SUV. Thomas was already behind the wheel, the engine purring like a caged beast. Get in, Gabriel barked, shoving the heavy passenger door open. Elena scrambled into the back seat, Gabriel sliding in right behind her as tires squealed against concrete. They rocketed up the ramp and burst onto the rain-slicked streets of Chicago, leaving the besieged Wellington Hotel far behind. Where are we going? Elena asked, her heart hammering against her ribs as she watched the city lights blur past the bulletproof glass. To end this, Gabriel said, pulling a sleek tablet from the seatback pocket. He rapidly typed in a series of encrypted commands, mobilizing his entire syndicate. Patrick and Croft just declared war on my soil. They think I'm gonna run. But you don't survive in this city by playing defense. He looked up, his dark eyes locking onto hers. Where is your father's dossier, Elena? If we are going to burn Dominic Kessler's empire to the ground, I need the gasoline. Elena took a deep, steadying breath. The fear that had paralyzed her for 3 years was dissolving, replaced by a cold, calculating anger. She was tired of running. It's not a physical file, Elena revealed, her voice steady. My father knew paper could be burned, and hard drives could be smashed. He encoded the ledger of Kessler's illegal shipping manifests and international bribes into a heavily encrypted blockchain ledger. The decryption key is hidden inside a vintage, leather-bound copy of the Bhagavad Gita that sits on the bookshelf of my apartment. It's the only thing I took when I ran. Gabriel's eyes widened slightly in genuine respect. A digital vault. Brilliant. He tapped the glass partition dividing them from the front seat. Thomas, reroute. We are going to Elena's apartment. Call Leo and tell him to rally the strike team. We're setting a trap. Elena's tiny rundown studio apartment in the South Loop was a stark contrast to the opulence of the Obsidian Room. It was meant to be the invisible life of a ghost. Gabriel stepped inside, his imposing frame making the small room feel instantly claustrophobic. He kept his Glock raised, scanning the shadows while Elena rushed to the rickety bookshelf near the window. Her fingers trembled as she pulled the ancient, gold-embossed text from the shelf. She flipped to the inside cover, peeling back a false paper lining to reveal a micro USB drive no larger than a fingernail. I have it, she breathed, holding it up. Good, Gabriel said, stepping closer. Now, we let them come. Using Elena's encrypted drive, Gabriel accessed the master ledger. The data was a goldmine of catastrophic proportions for the Kessler Syndicate. It detailed offshore accounts, bribed port authorities in Mumbai, and the exact transit routes of illegal arms shipments spanning a decade. Gabriel didn't just have leverage, he had the power to trigger an international manhunt. Gabriel placed a call directly to Silas Croft's personal cell phone, a number his intelligence team had intercepted hours ago. He put it on speaker, resting it on Elena's small kitchen table. You made a critical error tonight, Silas, Gabriel said, his voice a low, lethal purr. Moretti, Croft sneered through the static. You're a dead man running. Give us the Harrington girl, and maybe Kessler will let you keep the south side of Chicago. I don't think you understand the current power dynamic, Gabriel replied smoothly. I have the Harrington dossier. I am currently looking at a decade's worth of Kessler's financial ruin. In exactly 10 minutes, this drive will be transmitted to the Cybercrimes Division of Interpol, the FBI, and MI6. There was a suffocating silence on the other end of the line. What do you want? Croft finally demanded, his previous arrogance entirely evaporated. Gabriel looked at Elena, a dark, victorious smile playing on his lips. He gestured for her to step forward. It was her turn to hold the gun. Elena leaned over the phone. Kel khatam ho gaya hai. The game is over, she said in perfect Hindi, ensuring the men who had underestimated her heard the absolute certainty in her tone. Switching back to English, she continued, you will wire $50 million, the exact amount you framed my father for stealing, into a secure relief fund account for Mumbai. Then you and Patrick will walk into the FBI field office in downtown Chicago and confess to the assassination of Ambassador Harrington. You're insane, Croft hissed. We will never... You have 9 minutes left, Gabriel interrupted coldly. If you surrender, Kessler might spare your families when his empire collapses. If I hit send, you will be hunted by every intelligence agency on Earth, and Kessler will execute you himself for losing the leak. Make your choice. Gabriel hung up the phone. They stood in the quiet apartment, the digital clock on the stove ticking down the seconds. Elena felt a strange, terrifying sense of peace. She wasn't the helpless waitress anymore, and she wasn't just a disgraced diplomat's daughter. She had outmaneuvered the men who had destroyed her family, using the very language and intellect they had mocked. 7 minutes later, Gabriel's tablet chimed. A massive, untraceable wire transfer had just cleared an offshore humanitarian account. A minute after that, police scanners across the city erupted with chatter. 2 British nationals, heavily armed, had just surrendered themselves in the lobby of the federal building. Gabriel slowly closed the laptop, the blue light reflecting in his dark eyes. He looked at Elena, the ruthless Mafia boss, entirely captivated by the brilliant, dangerous woman standing in her cheap waitress uniform. Your father's name is cleared, Elena, Gabriel said softly. The ghosts can finally rest. Elena let out a breath she felt she had been holding for 3 years. The crushing weight of her false identity lifted, leaving behind a woman forged in fire. She looked up at Gabriel, recognizing the undeniable shift in their dynamic. They were no longer boss and servant, nor protector and protected. They were equals. What happens now, Mr. Moretti? Elena asked, her chin raised, a spark of challenge returning to her eyes. My shift at the Wellington is officially over. Gabriel closed the distance between them, gently tracing the line of her jaw with his thumb. The cold predator had vanished, replaced by a man looking at his queen. I think, Elena, Gabriel murmured, it's time you stop serving my table and start sitting at the head of it with me. The underground world forever whispered about the night a waitress brought a Mafia king to a halt with a single sentence. Elena Harrington didn't just survive the ruthless syndicate, she entirely reshaped it. By refusing to bow, she cleared her family's tarnished legacy and found an unlikely, terrifyingly equal partner in Gabriel Moretti. Sometimes, the most dangerous weapon in a room isn't a loaded gun, it's the courage to speak the truth in the dark.